So we are in Romans chapter 13. Last week we had read a few of the verses, laying out some groundwork, and just to review a little bit what we've covered. Romans chapter 13, we're looking at living submissively. And what is different from Romans chapter 11 going forward? What is different?
The first 10, 11 chapters were doctrine, and the latter are practical.
Right. First 11 chapters are doctrine, dealing with Jew and Gentile differences. The rest of the book is going to be dealing with application, where it gets a little more challenging. We're stubborn people. We want to do it our way instead of what God says. So, living sacrificially, chapter 12. Chapter 13, living submissively. 14 and 15, living sensibly. And then 14 and 15 also deals with matters of Christian liberty, which there's a lot of discussion about that, what people have a right to do. So living submissively. First 7 verses, we're to submit to authorities. 8 through 10 show us to love one another. 11 through 14, he talks about the sleeping saints should awake. We had talked just a little bit about the political situation at the time. One of the sects of the Grews were zealots. They were the ones that wanted to revolt against the Roman government. There was Barabbas, a rebel, and the Jews wanted to release this rebel that had murdered people instead of Christ. They thought at one time that Paul was this Egyptian who stirred up a rebellion and led 4,000 assassins out into the wilderness. In one other verse we touched on, Paul thought that people should, and through the Holy Spirit, you should try to work out your problems between each other instead of taking it to the heathens. So there's a lot of things talking about the government and how we should approach it and what we can be involved in. At the end of the class last week, we were talking about the fall of the Roman Empire, and I said I would try to find some information that I had on that. I couldn't find what I had had before. I had lost those slides when I lost a bunch of stuff on my computer. When I started looking for information, and this is why I take screenshots, because if you don't capture it and you have it, you may not see it again, and there's all kinds of crazy ideas out there. Definitely a decline in morals and values, political corruption. Then they start talking about unemployment, inflation, different things like that, which is revisionist history. They didn't have inflation, we know, because they weren't printing money to hold their thumb on people. But there is a parallel between the Roman government in the United States, the decline of morals and values, political corruption, military spending. And the more I looked, the more I didn't want to look any further, talking about the fall of the Roman Empire. This one was how climate change and plague helped bring down the Roman Empire, which is just absurd. And whenever somebody says something like that, you know how I reply. And the cow jumped over the moon. You can't just take what everybody says about something. You gotta check it out. So back to what we had looked at. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So we'll start off with a thinking question. See who read the chapter and what you say. So who did Paul write chapter 13 to? Don't be scared to answer. Who did? Code?
Jews.
The Jews? Anybody have another answer?
It was a mixed congregation, Gentiles too.
Mixed congregation? Us. Look, let every soul, that's everybody. And so many times we fall into the trap of thinking that this was written for them back then. It was, but this applies to us today. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers. In verse 2, whosoever, what kind of word is that?
Everyone, whosoever
Everyone.
whosoever resisted, you're resisting God.
Okay, and that's right. Little more on what does whosoever mean? It's a universal term. It includes everybody. Whosoever will, let him come unto me. So when we think about Romans chapter 13 and the other things that Paul wrote, we think, yeah, well, sure, they had this and that going on with the Romans and they did this and that, but it was written for and it applies to us. Let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. Whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resists the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive themselves damnation. Now, what is the purpose of government?
It's for the protection of everyone.
Okay.
And the power is given to those who are supposed to be protecting us and seeing that things run smoothly.
Okay. It's given for protection, see that things run smoothly.
To enforce God's law.
To enforce God's law. Yeah. Okay, so when you think about the different laws that we have lived under, so do we say that it's wrong to kill because we're under the old law and the Ten Commandments? Do we say that? Yes, no, don't know? Got some no's. Do we say that we don't kill because that commandment in the Ten Commandments was carried over into the New Testament? Okay, Jim? No? Okay. And I agree with you on that. Why do we say it's wrong to kill?
Because God said, whosoever takes man's life, that's the way it is.
Oh, okay, but that was during the Mosaic law.
Because it laws today of this country, and God has told us to obey the laws of the country, and all life is sacred. There's times when killing is just to uphold the law, and
That's true, but I'm focusing on thou shalt not kill. Okay, did you have a comment? So was it okay to kill before the Ten Commandments?
No.
No. How do we know that?
Because we can look when Cain and Abel.
Yeah, so back in Genesis 4. So there was a moral law that existed before the Ten Commandments. We don't have all the details of that, but we know back in the beginning in the book of Genesis, there was a moral law that it was wrong, and when Cain killed Abel, God put a curse on Cain. So what role does government play in God's plan?
Me today.
At any point.
To carry out his command.
Code.
It's supposed to be to punish the evil,
Okay, to punish the evil, and what else?
reward the good.
Okay. The government is what? That we talked about last week.
Institution.
Okay. It's one of God's three institutions. The first being the home. The government existed. Some kind of law existed from the beginning because we knew it was wrong to kill. And then the last institution is what?
God condemned murder, but God condemned those that didn't keep the law, and they had to suffer the consequences for another, where they killed them or whatever they did with them. But that's the difference. God instituted the law for them to keep, and if they didn't keep it, then they had to suffer the consequences.
There were consequences of not keeping the law. Code?
The churches,
The church. So all of society revolves around the home, the government, and the church.
All three of those institutions are to uphold the law that God has given. In the family, in civic society, and within the body. Like all of them are made to enforce the authority of God in the world.
Right. Okay, anybody have any comments? Okay, why would Paul stop at this point to urge Christians to obey civil government? Perhaps it was his concern that the Christians would rebel when persecuted and even reject civil government as having no authority over Christ's kingdom. Therefore, Paul wanted to verify that government authority is to be regarded as a divine arrangement. As a general rule, governments function for the good of the people. So, again, we talked about when the Romans would come in to destroy Jerusalem, one of the possibilities would be that you would have all of these rebellions. There was fighting going back and forth, but Paul is trying to stave off some problems so that people are acting as God would want them to. Okay. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to the evil. Will thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same. For he is a minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. For he beareth not the sword in vain, for he is the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Wherefore he must needs be subject, not only for wrath, but also for conscience sake. For this cause pay ye tribute also, for they are God's ministers, attending continually upon this very thing. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom is due. I'm going to go back and forth some on these slides because I can't get all the comments in at the same place. We talked about custom was the same as what? Taxes. Okay, consider some of the practices that government officials currently debate, legalize, or even finance with our taxes. Abortion, gambling, divorce, pornography, homosexuality, drug abuse, contraceptives, the education that justifies some or all of these things. What should our role or involvement be with this? When we are paying taxes to a government that is pushing forth this agenda. Jim?
We have to, the only thing a Christian can do, we pay these taxes for this junk because they pass the laws on us. But we don't have to accept it. We have to, the only thing that we can do is vote on these things.
Okay.
as far as I'm concerned.
How would you rate the Roman government? Good, bad, evil, indifferent?
Corrupt.
Very corrupt, very evil. And when they asked Jesus about paying taxes, what did he say?
Give to Caesar what is
Render
Caesar's.
unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's.
Yeah, he asked whose inscription is on the coin, and it was Caesar. And he said, there's your answer.
Pay taxes to Caesar then. You know, pay your taxes, and that way he'll take care of you, you know, so, you know, as far as
What,
place to live.
what if your conscience says, I don't feel like I should give my money to the government?
Go be Amish.
What's that?
Go be Amish. And-
Go be Amish?
No, there's only, God only, holds us to account for the things we have control over. What I have control over is doing my duty to complete God's commands, one of which is to pay my taxes, to submit to the government. As long as it's not, telling me to do something that's against God's will, but then those who are in charge of the government, they're held to account for the things that they do with those taxes.
Right.
So I can't tell them, okay, here's my taxes, but you can't spend it on this. As soon as I give it to them, it's theirs to spend the way that they deem it.
So, right. So I only have control over myself. And what God commands me to do, I do. He's going to hold me accountable if he says do this. He's going to hold me accountable if I do it or don't do it. He's going to hold those people then that take that money, he's going to hold them accountable for what they do with it. But we can't say, it's against my conscience to do that when God tells us what to do. And if I said, I don't want to give my money to the government, how would you answer that?
Say you're gonna get in trouble, that's what I'm saying. Because they got taxes in this country, and if you don't pay them, they're gonna.
Okay, that's something you might say. If I say I don't want to pay my money to the government, what would you say?
I'd go to verse 1,
Okay,
where it says, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers.
that's a good answer. Okay. What else? How else would you answer that? Is it my money? Code?
We're resisting
It isn't.
the higher powers, those that God has put in charge. So we're not only resisting them, but we're resisting God.
Okay, and the point I was getting at, if I say I'm not going to do that with my money, it's not my money, it's God's money. God owns everything, and he tells us, like Nat said, we obey, and then we obey God and do what he says, and he holds me accountable for what I do, and he's going to hold them accountable, because if you only paid taxes to a government on what you agreed on, that's not going to exist. David?
I was just saying, that's like ultimately, I think we've discussed it before, what Jesus was saying when he was saying, render to Caesar what is Caesar's. The money that is circulating within this country, it used to say, property of the United States on it, now it's a federal note or whatever those kinds of things are, but it is lent to me for a time in exchange for the effort that I put into work, and I use it to get things, but that whole system is owned by the government, which is in control by God ultimately, is this we're saying here.
Nat?
Everybody wants power, but they don't realize what really can happen to them if they don't use it right. So they want power, but they don't know the danger of it unless they do what God tells us to do right here.
Okay. Code?
I was reading in the paper, I think it was yesterday, the governor of West Virginia. He was worth billions, but he hadn't paid his taxes, and now they're taking everything away from him. Even though he's a senator now, but they're taking it all away from him because he didn't pay his taxes.
Right. Okay, should Christians and churches speak out about such issues, or should we remain silent?
Absolutely speak out about it.
And how? Do we form together and go out and march in the streets? What do we do? Okay, voting is one way. Teaching.
Individuals that we
The biggest impact we're going to have on changing the world is talking one-on-one with somebody. So you see people, we shouldn't be quiet about what's going on, but we shouldn't be extremists and go out and say, we've got to do this or we got to do that. We should speak out. In Acts 5:25, so one came and told them, saying, look, the men whom you put in prison are standing in the temple and teaching the people. Then the captain went with the officers and brought them without violence, for they feared the people, lest they should be stoned. And when they had brought them, they set them before the council, and the high priest asked them, saying, do we not strictly command you not to teach in his name? And look, you have filled Jerusalem with your doctrine, and intend to bring this man's blood upon us. So what did Peter say when the council told him this?
We ought to obey God rather than man.
We ought to obey, but Peter and the other apostles answered and said, we ought to obey God rather than men. So when this is switching from the taxes subject to a different thing, but when the government tells us something that goes against what God says, you got the government, you got God, who do we obey? God. What if we're put to death for it? That's the price. Code?
If we're put to death for it, then we're going to receive a reward.
We get our reward that much sooner. And again, as Christians, we shouldn't fear death at all. That's what we're looking forward to, is being at home in heaven, leaving this land of pain and sorrow.
This is a discussion that was had once, and I know about it. And one was complaining about paying taxes to another. And they both were pretty well off, I'll put it that way. And the one said to the other one, don't be griping about paying taxes. Just be thankful that you have been blessed enough to make what you're making. So therefore, what he would say, don't be complaining about something you're doing a whole lot better than everyone else.
Right. And again, people want to point their finger at somebody else. If I don't like living here, who's keeping me here?
I think what Paul's addressing throughout this is the same thing we might see in the world today. Is there were those who were like, we need to overthrow the Roman government.
Like Simon the Zealot.
Yes. Yeah, and so there's people today that will say the same. There are Christians saying the same thing, but that's not what we're called to do. We're not called to overthrow the government.
So we need to change the government, but through the proper channels. If we need to change a corrupt government, or people in a corrupt, not to say that all government is corrupt, but if there are corrupt people in it, we need to change that. There are avenues, and while we're working on that, we still need to obey God and what God says. So how far do we go in speaking out against something that's wrong? I just asked about if we're put to death.
Tell them the truth.
Tell them the truth.
The truth on the matter.
Give.
They'll have to deal with that then.
Give me an example from the Bible on that. I agree with what you said, but give me an example.
I was thinking of, Paul and Silas and the Philippian jailer. I mean, they had the ability to escape, but they didn't break the law in the sense.
So which one was put to death there? Okay, and I get where you're going. I get where you're going, but give me an example where someone spoke out.
And was put to death?
Yeah,
Oh, Jesus.
Code?
Steve.
In the Old Testament, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we're not gonna
Okay.
bow down before your God. So
Okay,
they were put in a
That's-
fiery furnace. but
that's a good example. Let's have an example in the New Testament. Janice? Stephen? They stoned him to death because he was just telling them the truth, and he called them stiff-necked, uncircumcised of the heart. They didn't like his message. And that was the council, the Sanhedrin. But can you think of a Christian that lost his life speaking to a governmental official because of what he told him? Matthew 14:1. At that time Herod the Tetrarch heard of the fame of Jesus, and said unto his servants, This is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead, and therefore mighty works do show forth themselves in him. For Herod had laid hold on John, and bound him and put him in prison for Herodias' sake, his brother Philip's wife. For John said unto him, It is not lawful for thee to have her. So John said it's not lawful for you to have your brother's wife, and he lost his life. We see, though, where we should use government, talking about the protection side, that we have rights as a citizen of a government, no matter what the government is, and Paul exercised his rights. Acts 22, the chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, and bade him that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know wherefore they cried so against him. And as they bound him, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, saying, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, are you a Roman? He said, Yes. The chief captain answered, With a great sum I obtained this freedom. And Paul said, But I was freeborn. Then straightway they departed from him, which should have examined him, and the chief captain also was afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him.
I was just thinking, like, almost all the examples we have of the Romans who were largely unbelievers were law-abiding, and they would uphold the law. They found out Paul is a citizen, they uphold the law, because they understood authority.
And they were objective, yeah. They may not have agree with something, but they understood authority. Do we understand authority today? We should. You look in the religious world, people don't understand authority. Authority, again, it's an upside down world we live in. Another principle or two here, 1 Timothy 2:1 and 2 shows that we should pray for rulers. Some claim we should not vote because we might be working against God's power to choose rulers according to his will. Yet God tells us to pray for our daily bread. Does this mean we just sit back and let God do it all, or should we try to find a job and let God use us as the means to answer the prayer? Should we avoid looking for a job because we might take a job other than the one God in his providence wanted us to take? People make arguments about why they don't vote, and this points out the silliness of it. So I've mentioned these two videos before, the separation of church and state and the silencing of God. The revisionist version of America's history fails to discern the distinctions made by the founders between religious tolerance on the one hand and the other belief in the priority of the Christian religion of the other. The separation of church and state is not in the Constitution, and what is written is that the state should stay out of the business of the church. The government should not get involved in the business of the church. Men have twisted that to say that the church can't get involved in the government. Again, both of these are excellent videos to watch. The silencing of God in public education, and that's, you go back to those slides I showed at the beginning. With the fall of the Roman Empire, things are being rewritten to whatever some wants it to be to have people swallow. It's crazy. It revolves around the government, but we've got to submit to it. We need to teach others that God is in control of everything. So, in verse 3, for rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good and have praise from the same, for he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. So let me ask you another question. So is it wrong for a Christian to be a police officer, or is it wrong for a Christian to be in the military and carry a gun? Yes, no?
I think just from my experience, it's very difficult to be a Christian in the military, but it is the place for a Christian to serve both the government and subsequently God, because God's authority is in that government.
Okay.
When I went to service in 1958, I didn't want to go, but the government said you got to go, and so I went. And I didn't want to kill anybody, but and I didn't have to kill anybody, but still, it was my responsibility to do what the government told me to do.
Okay. So, and I've mentioned this before, whenever anybody asks you, is it wrong for a Christian to fill in the blank, you stop them right there. God, how many laws does God have? Just one. He doesn't have a law for those that are Christians and a law for those that are not Christians. It's either wrong is wrong and right is right. And here it says, if you do evil, be afraid, for he does not bear the sword in vain, for he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. So the authority given to a police officer or someone in the military, it comes from God. Now, I knew an older gentleman, and he was against guns. He was against any kind of killing. And I asked him one day, and I said, if someone came into your house and was violently beating up your wife, would you shoot that person to save your wife's life? And he said, well, no. I said, well, what would you do? He said, I'd call the police. And I said, so you'd have the police come and shoot that person to save your wife? Well, yeah. And he didn't understand, there's just one law. It's either it's right or it's wrong. And Romans chapter 13, verse 4, he is God's minister and avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. It's ordained. Government is ordained by God. That's why we went back to the home is ordained, the government is ordained, the church is ordained.
How many Christians are afraid that something like that never comes up where he would have to do something like
Right.
that? You know, I'd take my wife, of course, you know, but that's what prayer is all about. A Christian is supposed to pray.
Right. And I agree with that, but there's this mentality that, well, it's wrong for me to do it, but somebody out there in the world that's not a Christian, they can go and do this stuff. It's either it's right or it's wrong. Verse 5, therefore, you must be subject, not only because of wrath, but also for conscience sake. For because of this you also pay taxes, for they are God's ministers, attending continually to this very thing. Render therefore to all their due, taxes to whom taxes are due, customs to whom customs, fear to whom fear, honor to whom honor. Owe no one anything except to love one another, for he who loves another has fulfilled the law. So, when taxes roll around in a few months, what do you do with them? Jim?
Fill them out,
You pay them.
pay your taxes.
You pay the taxes. When you pay the government the taxes, do you owe them anything then? When you've paid them? You have this debt, you pay it, that debt is paid. Owe no one anything except to love one another. So he's throwing in a little lesson here. You take care, when the government says you owe us these taxes, you take care of that debt. You pay that. The only thing you should owe anybody is love. When we owe love to everybody, can we ever pay that debt and then that debt is paid? Why not? Why can't we pay off that debt?
Can't earn our way into heaven.
We can't earn our way. When we consider what Christ did for us and that great love that he had for us, what God did for us, and then we are his children, instead of trying to pay our debt to others, to demonstrate that, how do we demonstrate that love that God showed to us?
Obedience.
We demonstrate it to somebody else. And if we have an idol up here, what do? We take that love and turn it inward, and we just love ourselves and want to do everything to satisfy our fleshly desires. It may be something in and of itself, it's not wrong, but when we put that over God, it's an idol just as sure as Molech and all of those other idols. For the commandments, verse 9, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, are all summed up in the saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So again, he's dealing with the practical applications here. So every so often I see these videos that pop up on my feed of these watchdog investigative reporters locally, Greene County, Cincinnati, places like that, where they're going and interviewing politicians, and they turn into some very heated discussions. You think about the government, we aren't going to have to deal with people in Washington, but you get on the community page and you see what's going on in the New Lebanon Council, and some of those people want to hang each other. And then you see people choosing sides, and it's if we do that, our effectiveness as a Christian has just gone out the window. if there's any other commandment, are all summed up in the saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. So the first so many chapters in Romans, what was the big back and forth? What was Paul trying to straighten out?
Jew and Gentile, like they're fighting.
Jew and Gentile, why was there a rub between the two?
Because the Gentiles, the Jews thought they were God's chosen people and they just automatically were in.
The Jews thought they were God's chosen people. We are of Abraham's seed. We have the sign of the covenant. Those Gentiles don't deserve salvation. And how, under the old law, how would a Jew earn salvation? How would a Jew earn salvation under the old law?
Through being circumcised and obeying what God told.
By perfect obedience to the law. Could anybody keep the law perfectly? No, nobody could. So that was their idea of righteousness, was keeping the law perfectly. And Paul holds up Abraham as the example of righteousness. When was he called a righteous person? When he obeyed. Was he under the 10 Commandments? No. He predated the 10 Commandments. He was called righteous when he got up and left his home and did what God said he wanted them to do. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. When people try to say, well, I did this, I do that, God owes me salvation, we need to make sure that we are showing love. Again, the great loves, we love God, we love God's word, we love the lost, we demonstrate that, and that's a beginning point. That's a beginning point. We will end here at verse 10 and pick up here next week, and I thank you for your comments.